What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. So the warmongering fuckpig Tony Blair is back yet again, this time in the papers for all the right reasons. It seems he has been seeking EU funding while trying to stop Brexit, according to the Telegraph, who claim they have emails to back this up. Now, I don't know about you guys, but asking the EU for millions while trying to stop Brexit definitely seems like a conflict of interest to me. So let's take a look at the Telegraph's article on it and see what it has to say. It headlines, Tony Blair saw EU funding while trying to stop Brexit. Tony Blair was bidding for contracts with the European Union for his Institute for Global Change, as he publicly campaigned to overturn Brexit, the Telegraph can disclose. Documents obtained by this newspaper show that the former Prime Minister held talks with officials about striking a funding agreement between the European Commission and the not-for-profit Tony Blair Institute. Bit suspicious if you ask me, especially considering his recent very public attempts to stop Brexit, as we all know, and have mocked many times, both in my Discord server and on the channel through videos and comments. The officials included Ana Gallo Alvarez, who was previously seconded to Mr Blair's Middle East Envoy office as Deputy Head of Mission. She chaired a meeting between Mr Blair's staff and Commission officials last year, after Mr Blair held talks with her then boss, Neven Mimca, an EU Commissioner. So as we all know, Tony Blair is obviously neck deep in the EU Commission. On Saturday, a TBI spokesman insisted that the Institute was perfectly entitled to seek EU funding for work relevant to EU funding streams, adding, as a matter of fact, we have not yet submitted a formal application, so no funding has been received. And yes, while you're perfectly entitled to seek this funding, no one's saying you're not, we're just saying it looks a bit suspicious, that's all. Especially considering Tony Blair has been openly trying to stop Brexit. Given the reports about Joe Swinson's husband's company, or the company he works for anyway, definitely brought Joe Swinson's love for the EU in for some scrutiny. And the same should be true for Mr Blair here, especially considering his track record when in office. So the fact that the Blair Institute is entitled to do it makes absolutely no difference. Like I said, it still looks very fishy. She said any suggestion of a connection between the talks and Mr Blair's opposition to Brexit was absurd. No, it's not really absurd, they're both the same thing. He's talking to the EU Commission about getting funding, and we're trying to leave the EU, which is something he doesn't want. In emails seen by the Telegraph, Mr Blair's staff explained that the Institute wanted to explore opportunities to receive financial support, and said Mr Blair had unique connections with leaders of developing countries. Yeah, every developing country the world over is trying to be his friend, so that he doesn't claim they've got weapons of mass destruction and invade them, like he did when he was the Prime Minister. One exchange reveals that they even considered registering the Institute in an EU partner country, amid fears that a no-deal Brexit could cut off funding to British organisations from the bloc's £26 billion development budget. Oh, so the Institute's got nothing to do with Brexit, yet you're preparing to make it an EU institute so you can continue to get their money. It's not looking very good considering what these emails are saying, is it, Tony Blair? For almost a decade, Mr Blair picked up lucrative deals with foreign governments and private companies through Tony Blair Associates, his commercial advisory firm, before winding up the organisation in 2016 and opening TBI. Mr Blair receives no payments for his work. Yeah, I wonder how else he gets his money then. Or are the expenses that much that he doesn't need to earn a salary? However, funding received by the Institute helps to cover the cost of his travel and accommodation around the globe on behalf of TBI. Mr Blair and his staff held meetings with EU officials earlier this year as he was separately campaigning against a no-deal Brexit and insisting the referendum was reversible, as I said at the start of the video, and, as we all know, it's fucking not. The referendum is not reversible unless you want riots this country has never seen before. And definitely not reversible now, since we have a Tory Prime Minister who says he's going to deliver Brexit. And given what we've seen happen to MPs in the last month, my betting is he's going to deliver some form of Brexit just so he doesn't end up getting drained from the swamp like the rest of them. The Institute insisted all meetings had been properly declared in the Commission's Transparency Register. Yet no one's saying it's not. We're just saying that it looks very fishy, because in my opinion, this is a massive conflict of interests. And that's forgetting, of course, the obvious fact that Tony Blair needs to shut his fucking mouth, because it's got nothing to do with him. He was the Prime Minister before, he run this country into the ground. Took us into wars he didn't need to. So if I was him, I'd pipe down, buy myself a little island and stay there. It continues. Cache of emails reveal behind the scenes talks to give former PM's institute closer links with Europe. She was one of Tony Blair's most senior aides in his role as Middle East envoy, having been seconded from the EU to support the Prime Minister's work some 10 years ago. So it may have been with a sense of deja vu that Ana Gallo Alvarez found herself dealing with Mr. Blair once again last year. Mr. Blair had set up the not-for-profit Tony Blair Institute and he was seeking EU funding for some of his work. Miss Gallo Alvarez was now a senior advisor to Nevin Mimka, the European Commission's International Cooperation and Development Commissioner. Mr. Blair's efforts to secure EU support for his institute are set out in a cache of emails obtained by the Sunday Telegraph. Which absolutely none of these are. This is just Tony Blair's business deals after leaving office. No one cares. Talks about Brexit here, which is the only real times. Mr. Blair used an interview with the BBC's Andrew Neil to call for a second Brexit referendum in January 2019. They took place as Mr. Blair, 66, publicly lobbied for a second referendum on Brexit, insisting that leaving the EU would be disastrous for Britain. In many ways, Mr. Blair's willingness to work with the Commission on projects around the world was entirely consistent with his view of the benefits of EU membership. One memo written by an EU official on July 10th last year appears to suggest that Mr. Blair's efforts on behalf of his institute were bearing fruit. At a request of the Office of Mimka, yesterday I participated in a meeting with the Tony Blair Institute of Global Change, chaired by Ana Gallo, wrote the unnamed official. The meeting was an introduction for the TBI on EU's development cooperation. They expressed interest to work closer with the EU and to explore opportunities to receive financial support. The memo set out how TBI run projects in 14 countries with a total annual budget of $11 million. In fact, the latest accounts show an impressive turnover of $45 million or £34 million. Of that, $41 million went on administrative expenses, including the cost of Mr. Blair's travel as part of his work for the TBI, for which he does not draw a salary, as we see earlier. TBI has also employed 213 staff, averaging about 70 grand a year each. We're not going to read over that because we just don't care. Discussions between the Institute and the Commission appear to have begun in February 2018 when Mr. Blair met Mr. Mimika in Brussels. Posting a picture on Twitter of the pair shaking hands in front of the EU flag, Mr. Mimika declared that he and Mr. Blair had an excellent discussion on how to improve governance in Africa, where the former Prime Minister's efforts have been focused for some years. An email sent on Miss Gallo's behalf, inviting colleagues to attend the July meeting with TBI staff, said it was a follow-up to those talks. The meeting took place at the European Commission's headquarters in Brussels, which Mr. Blair previously visited to discuss Brexit with Jean-Claude Juncker, the then European Commission President, much to the consternation of pro-Leave MPs who accused him of interfering. And rightly so, much like Dominic Grieve and the rest of the Ramonin traitors did when we had the snakes on a train situation not long before the election. The official explained that the TBI provided advice to the governments of developing countries on delivering key policies and improving living standards, including by embedding staffs in the offices of prime ministers and presidents. Services are requested by governments often following exchanges and advice from former British PM Tony Blair. In their view, this political connection and dialogue is quite unique, and according to them, this is what makes the TBI different to other entities that carry out similar work. The memo of July 2018 discussion notes that some countries pay TBI directly for its work, but that the Institute also receives financial contributions from charities and the US government. Now we'll skip over the rest of it because they're just talking nonsense. On January 25th, 2019, coincidentally just days after a public pronouncement by Mr. Blair that a no-deal Brexit would profoundly damage the UK economy, Miss Gallo Alvarez wrote to one of Mr. Blair's aides with a question about the practicalities of contacts with TBI in the event of such an outcome. I don't want to disturb TB with this, but I mentioned to him I would be contacting you, she said. Miss Gallo Alvarez, a Spanish official who had worked as Mr. Blair's deputy head of mission in Jerusalem in 2007 and 8, wrote, in a view of a future cooperation with the TBI, I have a quick legal question. Is TBI a UK entity, or given your international presence, an international non-governmental organisation? The latter would be ideal. particularly in the case of a no-deal Brexit, and also on the agility with which we can enter into contracts with you. So that explains why Tony Blair didn't want a no-deal Brexit, because it would make EU funding for the TBI much more difficult to get. I don't know about you guys, but to me that sounds like a conflict of interest. If you were to be a UK entity only in the case of a no-deal Brexit, there might be restrictions for some programmes. So there's definitely a reason for Tony Blair to not want a no-deal Brexit. A member of the Institute staff responded on January 28 explaining that the Institute was registered in the UK, but added, "We are looking into our options should there be a no-deal Brexit. This includes registering in an EU partner country." So they're already planning to get around it anyway. In the event, Mr Blair did not have to worry. The effort to remove the option of a no-deal Brexit this year, which he supported, was successful, meaning that there was no need to activate TBI's contingency plans. Well, there's no need to activate them yet. And the TBI spokesman says they're entitled to, yet we know they said that earlier and they haven't received it. The spokesman added, "The idea there is a connection with Mr Blair's opposition to Brexit is absurd." Well, it's not absurd given what's there, but we don't have evidence that it's guaranteed to be that. I would suggest there's a conflict of interest there, possibly. It definitely seems very fishy, but to be honest, not surprising in the slightest. It is Tony Blair. The guy is an absolute shitweasel, let's be honest. But on that note, guys, I am going to end the video there. That article was a hell of a lot longer than I anticipated, and I even cut some of it out. Before I go though, I do want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with a notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I'll see you all in the next one.
And Corbyn neutral by Christmas.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. Slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.
Ramon! Ramon!